Okay, there's no point boring you with a long introduction to what this video is going to be about. If you saw the thumbnail, then you already know what I'm doing today. Before I even really get into this whole massive debate that's been going around for like a while now, I'm going to lay down some rules for this. For starters, I'm not sticking to the realism lens nor the power scaling lens. Yes, I do mostly power scaling videos on my channel, but for this I'm going to do both a realistic segment and a power scaling segment for each matchup. So that way, at least everybody that watches this, no matter what lens they look through, is at least gonna get the general idea of how I'd see the fight going under their view of how fights should be played out under these circumstances. So, why am I making this video at all? I mean, I've seen people make videos about this way before I have, so why am I so late to this if I am making a video on this? To put it simply, I didn't realize there were so many videos about this until like today, and then I watched a few of them, and quite frankly, a lot of them just annoyed me. Neither side really seems to understand how the debate should go. People are either really dead set on a power scaling lens or a realistic lens, or they're trying to apply one lens to each and no lens to the other. I myself am kind of guilty of this. During my Rexy vs. Sue video, where I basically went over why I don't think Goji-Center got their video right, although I did admit that under their more realism-based videos, yeah, a real-life T-Rex should be Rexy, due to having several pretty big advantages over her, like better eyesight, a stronger bite force in realism, not if you're going off feats, and just a better overall build for actual combat in real life. Now, obviously, I did say in the video that if they were taking Rexy directly out of her verse, with all of her inverse logic staying there, and then pulling Sue straight out of real life, Rexy would pretty much one-shot Sue, for lack of a better explanation. I mean, there's not much Sue can do to a dinosaur that can run through trees and crush meter-thick steel. There's not much any real-life animal could really do against that. But if Rexy was a real creature, she has a lot of design flaws that would make those feats even more impossible for her than they would be for a real-life dinosaur. So, jumping right into this with the Indominus 2.0 versus the Indominus 1.0. I'm going to start off with realism, and this is a odd one. Before we really get into any stats, I feel it's most important to go over their sizes. And there's two ways you can have these creatures be compared. For starters, you can just assume that the Indom 2.0 is around the same length as the original Indominus, as Goji-Center basically implies that and states that. They even basically say that it shouldn't be any smaller than the actual, like, real Indom. Now, the only problem with this is that their actual measurement of its length is around 40-ish feet, I believe, whereas the original Indominus does have arguments to be well over that in length. And obviously their Indominus is shorter, just due to their own, like, it's not only just its build, but them just blatantly saying that. It's to help with its quadrupedal build. But, regardless, I mean, even if you do think it's drastically smaller than the original Indominus, it's still a pretty big theropod. Obviously, in real life, smaller theropods typically would lose to the larger ones, but for this, I'm going to be generous in the Indom 2.0 and assume they are around the same height and length. Well, not height, just length. As, I mean, that's obviously what Goji-Center was going for. Even if they didn't have the exact length that you could argue the original Indom is, they were going for that. And I'm sure if they did actually find the statements for that and found out that that is more accurate to the films, they would obviously alter the Indominus they made. I don't think them making it smaller was in any way intentional, and I don't think that they themselves think the Indominus is that big, so we're just going to have them at around the same size. I know some people will probably think this is a little biased towards the Indom 2.0 right off the bat, but I mean, I'm going with their intention over a potential just mistake in the video's editing. As for weight, they should be pretty comparable, even though the original Indom is still obviously taller, even with them being the same length. The 2.0 is a little bit more robust looking, has a slightly larger head for body size, bigger arms obviously, and just it just seems like a buffer creature overall for its size. So if there is a weight difference between the two, I don't think it's a substantial one by any means. The height difference and then the width difference between the two kind of just evens it out. As for bite force, this one shouldn't really be surprising in a realistic setting. Obviously, not only the placement of the original Indom's teeth, but just the overall shape of its head are causing some problems. The Indominus' skull isn't necessarily built for a super powerful bite. Obviously, in verse, its bite is far stronger than even the real-life Tyrannosaurus Rex and even stuff like the Deinosuchus, but in a realistic setting, if it was a real animal in real life, it probably would have a pretty bad bite for a theropod its size, just due to the kind of poor design of its overall like skull shape, teeth, even its jaw muscle placement, just not great. Whereas the Indom 2.0 has a skull very heavily based around the Tyrannosaurus Rex, the real life version, not the Jurassic version. Even though the Jurassic Tyrannosaurus Rex doesn't have a terrible overall skull shape, even for a real life animal, the real life one does have a slightly better one. So when it comes to realism, obviously the Indom 2.0 is packing a significantly stronger bite. You could also add in the fact that it has not only venom but iron teeth. Now, a pretty big misconception I keep hearing is that the iron teeth actually heavily boost the bite force. They really don't. Sure, they might add a little bit extra power to the teeth just due to them being more durable now, but the point of the iron on a shrew's teeth isn't necessarily to amp up its actual like bite power. It's actually just to boost its like durability, amp its like resistance to stuff like tooth decay, etc. So no, it's not like making the bite like 5 times stronger or anything like some people are trying to say online. It definitely amps the bite up, but it's not like a massive like multiplier or something. That's not how teeth work. Now for the first category, the Indom 1.0 should have had an advantage in normally speed. In the film, not only is the Indom 1.0 like just blatantly faster than Rexy, who has a pretty consistent cannon speed of around 32 miles per hour, but she's also obviously faster in stuff like the Giga, that's even slower in Rexy, around 30, and she can keep up with vehicles that have most estimates being around 60-ish miles per hour, as well as keeping up with the Raptors to a degree, which can also hit speeds around there. So in the film, she's significantly faster than any theropod, but well, any large theropod, but if you look at her speed, like what her speed would be in real life, yeah, no, she realistically probably wouldn't be that fast. It would most likely shatter her legs to even try to move that fast, or at the very least cause some pretty bad muscle tearing, because theropods of that size, with most of her weight estimates being around, the lowest I've seen is 6, the highest I've seen is 12, the most consistent is around 9 to 10, just like a real life Tyrannosaur. So yeah, dinosaurs of that weight aren't designed to move fast at all. Like a real life Tyrannosaurus Rex couldn't even hit 20 miles per hour by most measurements. So yeah, no, in real life that would just kind of break how physics work on creatures like that. It's just ignoring that her legs really aren't built for that, even in her own character design. So with the Indom 2.0 being not only quadrupedal but able to actually kind of run, something most theropods realistically wouldn't be able to do, yeah, the Indom 2.0 is likely the faster of the two, at least in a short burst. Though it's debatable if it's a massive margin, as the Indominus should still be faster than a real life Tyrannosaurus Rex, just due to her, she's supposed to be agile. Sure, it might break a little bit of physics and probably cause some pretty bad problems for her over the course of her life if she was a real life animal, but I mean, that's kind of an element of her. If we were to assume that she was no faster than a real life Tyrannosaurus Rex, then she would kind of just get blitzed, unironically. Even in a realistic setting, she would get speed blitzed, which is obviously not good for her. I'm sure most people watching can probably tell where this is going, but if we look at other stuff like arm strength, ape arms kind of beat weird theropod, kind of Thesiosaurus, Giga, T-Rex hybrid arms in real life. That's pretty obvious. Stuff like intelligence is a lot more debatable. The Indom 2.0 is kind of implied to at least be as smart as something like a chimp, potentially even smarter to a degree, whereas the original Indom is also probably in that same tier, due to being as smart as raptors, which are compared to chimps. Which one's smarter is kind of debatable. I think if you go off what we see in the film, the original Indom is probably at least as smart, if not a little bit smarter than 2.0, but the gap really isn't that big, especially in combat intelligence. When it comes to just basic intelligence, I do think the 1.0 is smarter. I mean, even though you could argue that she realistically shouldn't be that smart, I mean, come on, I've already nerfed her enough at this point that we don't need to make her dumb too. As again, even if she got nerfed, she'd still probably be about as smart as a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which was also pretty smart in real life for a dinosaur and just an animal in general. So when it comes to combat intelligence, I don't think there's a huge gap there. I mean, 2.0 can use tools, but the only reason 1.0 doesn't use tools is because she can't. She doesn't have an option to. The only way she could is if she used her mouth like a crow would, which she probably could do. We just don't see her do it. So for combat intelligence and just intelligence in general, I think it's just such a weird area that you can't really pick one off of what we know from the film and what we see in the video for 2.0. And at this point, I really don't even need to go over armor. Obviously, realistically, the one that has more armor is going to be the more durable of the two, even if the Indom has some pretty weird and hyper unrealistic durability shown in the film. That obviously doesn't scale here because this is applying by essentially the Indom being ripped out of the films, dropped into real life as a real life animal, and now having to abide by, you know, physics and not whatever Hollywood feels like doing with a big dinosaur that day. So yeah, at this point, Indom 2.0 would probably annihilate her. And I think there's even an argument that the smaller version would have a chance due to it being pretty much specially made to hunt large prey like sauropods. So yeah, at this point, I think that it's pretty obvious which side's winning in the realism, at least for this matchup. It might be different for the Indoraptor, but we'll go ahead and do that now. An Indoraptor, realistically, yeah, the 2.0 has a lot over the original. For starters, I mean, just think about it. It's the same. It's basically the original is basically just the Indom, but smaller. So it has a lot of the same problems that the original Indom had, but even worse here. Its bite would be pretty bad in real life. It has the same issues: the teeth placement, a thin neck, pretty bad muscle placement, all sorts of just problems that would basically nerf its bite into oblivion. I mean, the only really good thing the Indom even has in its own fictional verse, where it is far stronger than it should be, is its durability. And that gets taken away here because obviously that's not how durability works in real life. No dinosaurs realistically taking bullets like that. Nothing in its genome would really warrant that. Meanwhile, the Indoraptor 2.0 is pretty much made to be what the Indoraptor is in the film, but in a more realistic setting. So realistically, it could kind of do a lot of what the Indo does in the film, just to a lesser extent, obviously. Like, yeah, the scales it has from the Arapaima, I mean, Arapaimas are hyper durable in real life. They could be somewhat bullet resistant in certain situations. Obviously, there's still cases of them dying to, you know, wooden spears and stuff. But Arapaima scales are hyper durable in real life. They are bullet resistant to a degree. They're not bulletproof or anything, but they're definitely durable, far more durable than what the Indoraptor would have in real life if it was the one from the film taken out and placed into, you know, real life logic. So you add on all the other stuff like, you know, venom, specialized bites that basically cause the Indo to bleed out after it gets bitten, just better arms, stronger weapons, a lighter but faster build. It's just not close. It would be even less close if the fight was happening near water, due to the Indo 2.0 being extremely skilled underwater as well, due to it being able to kind of just walk on the bottom of the like riverbeds or even like shallow like ocean waters. So yeah, the terrain, it can also just add an even bigger advantage to the Indo 2.0 in a realistic setting, meaning that the Indo 1.0 has like zero chance of winning if it was a real creature against this thing in a realistic setting. But what about power scaling wise? Well, starting off with the Indominus, if you're going off power scaling, there's two ways you can do it here. There's two ways that I've seen people do it, actually. And there's a lot of debate on if you should do either of these. First of all, you could argue that Goji-Center's hybrids don't scale to the universe, the Jurassic Universe's feats, because, well, the way Goji-Center does their videos seems to be so realistic that most people would assume they don't know about the scaling, which isn't true. They do. Or you can argue that they do scale to the universe, but due to the way they do their videos, they just made it seem more realistic for the video as power scaling is just not their cup of tea. I'm going to do both, but to make one thing very clear, Goji-Center knows about the feats in Jurassic Park. I've talked to one of the researchers in one of my videos, in the comments of one of my videos. They know about the feats. They're well aware of the feats. Their justification for not using the feats over realism is because there's inconsistencies. A lot of them. The same goes for arc scaling with the Giga versus Ramorak. And I get where they're coming from. I 100% get where they're coming from. I have nothing against Goji-Center themselves. I think their research team does a very good job. Their videos have been very entertaining for me for a while. I've watched them for years now. I honestly love Goji-Center as a channel, but obviously I've had different takes than them, as my debunk video on Rexy vs. Sue obviously shows, and obviously my own voiced opinions on their Legendary Godzilla vs. Shin Godzilla video. But ignoring all that, they know about the scaling, they know about the feats, but they have a justification for not using them. I just kind of wish they would say that in one of their videos, so people aren't out here thinking now, because Sue beat Rexy in their video, that Sue could do the stuff that is shown in the Jurassic franchise. Like, there are people that have unironically said that Sue just kind of scales everything in Jurassic Park now, in Jurassic World, because Goji-Center had the fight in a more realistic way. I guess they just assumed that they also implemented power scaling when they didn't. I just wish that people didn't just see that fight and assume instantly that now Sue can run like 32 miles per hour, crush meter-thick steel, run through massive steel fences, and just do stuff that dinosaurs realistically could not do in real life. Now, I get why people would assume that. It's annoying for me personally, but it's nothing to do with Goji-Center themselves. It would be weird for them to have a warning like that on their videos, because, like, a lot of their fan base has made their opinions on power scaling pretty clear. A lot of them are not fans, and the massive debate here shows that pretty well. Power scalers and I guess it would be the paleontology community now just really hate each other right now over this debate, which is kind of sad, because I like both communities and I like both things. As a kid, I literally wanted to be a paleontologist, and I was that way up until like middle school. And now that I'm a power scaler, seeing people like me go after people like that and vice versa, it's just kind of annoying. I don't get it. And I've been part of it too, but I try to stay out of it at this point. It's just gotten out of hand. But back to the point of this video, starting off with the assumption that Goji-Center's hybrids would just still be realism and the original hybrids would scale to Jurassic feats, obviously. I don't think I really have to tell you how this goes. If you've been listening, obviously fictional feats kind of trump realistic stuff. I don't like doing a stomp like this. That's why you'll never really see me do that outside YouTube Shorts, which I only really do because it's easy to say how one character stomps another in a short period of time over explaining a fair fight, because typically a fair fight requires a lot more arguments on who would actually win, whereas a short fight's, you can just say, hey, this guy can blow up a universe, this guy is like planetary, the universe guy wins. It's easy for like a short. But yeah, it's a stomp if you're using that logic. I think most people that are arguing with the realistic argument would agree with this, or at least should. Most of the people I've seen talk about this debate, at least most of them will concede that some of the stuff in Jurassic just kind of outscales the stuff in real life, but they prefer to use the realistic lens, obviously. So I'm sure a lot of people would agree with me here, that if you're using the fictional feats for the original hybrids and you're not using stuff like that for the new hybrids, the originals would just kind of obliterate them. That's what happens when you put a CGI monster up against a real, well, not really real life animal, but a creature that's supposed to be a real life animal. But if we go off the scaling chains presented in the video and amp them up to what they are in the films, some people are probably going to be pretty surprised by how this goes, because the Goji-Center hybrids absolutely obliterate the originals under this new chain of logic. If you're using the scaling for the Jurassic verse for both of them, the Indom 2.0 is specifically stated to be able to kill everything on the island. Everything. That includes Rexy herself, who was not only like pretty much rivaling the Indominus, even while double nerfed, but would have probably killed her by her, well, not really by herself, she still had Blue, but would have killed her with the help of Blue if the Moza didn't, interrupt, as she was winning towards the end of the fight. Obviously, there's debate to be made that the Indom would also could have killed her earlier when she had her pinned, but regardless, those two are kind of relative. And a healthy Rexy would be even stronger. And from what I get from Goji-Center's videos, the Indom 2.0 is supposed to be stronger than most dinosaurs in the verse, if not all of them. Obviously, they never came out and said that the Indom 2.0 would beat the Giga, or the Indom 2.0 would beat the Spino, or the Indom 2.0 would beat, you know, any of the other top dogs in the verse, but I think it's pretty heavily implied. We also know their other hybrid, Ultima and Paratrix, can kind of just one-shot Rexes and Spinos, and they want to have those two fight, so I'd assume that, I mean, the Indom 2.0 has to at least be kind of relative. Obviously not as strong, as I 100% think that the Indom 2.0 is going to get obliterated by the Imperatrix when that video comes out. But I think it should be able to at least endure a hit, something that the Spino couldn't do. So if you're going off that scaling chain, the Indom 2.0 has a better and more consistent argument for being above Rexy than the original Indom has. The Indom 2.0 would also have offspring. I know this is supposed to be which one's stronger individually, but I mean, that's an ability this thing has, an ability it could exploit. And if you're going to argue that the original Indom should get Raptor packs, why would the new one not get its children? And a swarm of 2.0s under this scaling chain would obliterate the original. You could even argue a swarm of realistic in the Indom 2.0s would probably beat the original too, as even though there's a huge power gap there, getting jump is still getting jump. The best way I can point out the power difference between a realistic Indom 2.0 and the power scalified one is look at Goji-Center's D-Rex video. The way they had the D-Rex under realism, this thing's like a clumsy, just kind of horribly built animal that can barely even move. And probably in real life couldn't even move. They were kind of generous to it here, honestly. However, once they talked about under Jurassic World logic, something they themselves said is a thing that they know of, so why people think they don't know about the scaling when they definitely do is kind of odd to me. They said themselves under Jurassic World logic it would be a lot stronger, and the same thing would go for their own hybrids as well as Rexy, the same Rexy they had in the Sue video. It's just they don't like the inconsistencies, and that's not their cup of tea for a video. They prefer realism, which is 100% valid. I just wish some people would, you know, get the difference between a person doing a video with realism and a person doing a video of power scaling, because they aren't the same thing. So why people try to use arguments for realism in a power scaling debate or arguments for power scaling in realism debates, it's kind of odd. The only reason I even did a video on why Rexy would beat Sue is because people were doing just that in the comments of that video, and there was like a war between power scalers and the paleo community, which was, I was trying to explain why that's a dumb argument, why it's a dumb debate, because they're arguing on two different versions of a debate. One person's arguing with realism, one person's arguing with power scaling. It devolves into both just screaming at each other, and no, neither side gets what the other's saying. But moving on to the Indo, it's kind of the same situation here. Yeah, the Indo 1.0 has kind of arguably higher statements in verse, and if you're going out the video games, has better feats. But again, the Indo 2.0 is actually canonically, in their own story, a supposed upgrade of the original. So it's made to be better than the original, even within the canon of their own little story going on here. So they know, in the verse, the people that are making it know about the original Indoraptor. They wouldn't make something drastically weaker. They were trying to make something better. And they did. Because if you're going by overall builds, which do still matter if characters are of equal power, I know I say size and stuff doesn't matter in power scaling. That's only if you're having like a grizzly bear fight Goku, because obviously a grizzly bear is bigger than Goku, but Goku's still going to atomize it. If it's like, say, it's a pretty even fight. Void Ghidorah versus Space Godzilla. Void Ghidorah is drastically bigger than Space Godzilla, and this is me going off dimensional scaling for the Haysayer. I know a lot of people don't agree with that. Whatever, ignore that if you don't. I don't really care to hear that in the comments. This is just a comparison. But if you're going off build, Void Ghidorah's got a pretty significant size advantage. He has a lot of advantages in that category, size and stuff, which would matter because they're pretty even and consistent level. So Void Ghidorah has an advantage there. Obviously, the fight is a lot more complex. I've talked about this fight before in comments. It's way more complex than just size, but size would still matter there, even though it wouldn't in some other debates. And stuff like build still matters here. Yeah, the new Indo would be significantly, well, not really significantly, but slightly lighter than the original, but it still has an overall better build for fighting. And it's also probably smarter. Not by much, but just off some of the stuff they described this thing being able to do. It seems a smarter combatant, not necessarily a smarter creature overall, as the Indo's at least as smart as the original Indom, which is like stupidly smart, even if you do the realistic version. So if you're going off overall intelligence, I think the original Indo is arguably maybe smarter, but if you're going off like the actual intelligence of like for fighting, one of these things is an experiment that has never really been trained to fight. The other one is a literal super military dog. This thing's been taught to kill. It knows what it's doing. So yeah, it has an advantage there. It also has the advantage in the fact that these things travel in packs. Yeah, I know it's supposed to be an individual thing again, but I mean, it has a pack. In a realistic inverse encounter, this thing, the original Indo is getting jumped and it's dying. And then this thing has advantages in venom. It has a bite that continuously draws blood, just like in the realistic fight. It's the same situation, just these two are kind of just stronger now. And while I do think the original Indo does have a chance against the 2.0 in a equal stats, both scale to higher stuff, power scaling debate, I just think that the 2.0 has that overall better chance just due to the advantages it has in build, since they're so even in power. You're going to have to look at their weapons, and the Indo 2.0 has better weapons. And arguably better durability, as yeah, Arapaima scales in real life wouldn't be as durable as the Indo, but this is an amped up one. So the Arapaima scales would probably also be amped up to that same level, if not stronger. So yeah, that's how I see the hybrids doing. So as you can see, depending on how you look at it, there's a different winner of each version of this. The same goes for Sue vs. Rexy and every other Jurassic matchup out there with a real-life dinosaur. Because a lot of times, if you're going off realism, a movie franchise made by people that, although they did base the general idea of the dinosaur around the real thing, still went out there with what the dinosaur looks like and are going off a lot of data that's kind of outdated. A lot of times there's going to be design flaws there, because obviously a film monster made to be cool for a movie isn't going to be as well made for, you know, being an actual animal as a real animal is, one that's been shaped by millions of years of evolution versus one that was made up in a person's head. So if you're going off realism, a lot of times you're going to see the fictional creature just not really work well in real life. But if you're going off power scaling, most of the time you're going to have the fictional creature be stronger. Of course, there's cases where it's the complete opposite, where the fictional creature is a lot weaker. It's because fiction has a wider range of power than real life does. Real life has a set physical, like, rule set. Fiction doesn't. It's whatever the person thinking wants to do. So yeah, if you're doing realism stuff, let's say Rexy vs. Sue, Rexy probably loses to Sue pretty bad. Although she is slightly taller, most of her weight estimates aren't bigger than Sue. Her overall build is just blatantly worse. Stuff like her eyesight would get in the way, and her bite force and stuff wouldn't be as strong as it is in the films, because in real life it would shatter her bones like glass. But if you're doing a power scaling debate where you're giving her power scaling, you're not giving Sue any, I mean, it's like putting a random guy up against Michael Myers. Like, it's not going to go very well. And if you're doing a debate where you're amping Sue's scaling up to the Jurassic level, basically scaling your Jurassic Rexes, it's a completely new playing field now, because now, although Sue would probably still be slower than Rexy due to just not being built to be as fast as Rexy, she would still probably have a strength advantage due to having a better build now that they're on a consistent level. So it's a completely different playing field now. And honestly, I couldn't tell you who would win there, because that would take a while to really think of a winner there. And the same goes for this debate, and most debates for that matter. At least ones involving Jurassic dinosaurs and Ark dinosaurs, stuff like that. So with the hybrids, I think for the most part, if you're giving the Goji-Center ones power scaling and you're giving the other ones power scaling like I would normally do for a debate, the Goji-Center ones do win due to the power scaling setup in the video and the chains that Goji-Center themselves set up, as well as Goji-Center not being ignorant of the scaling, as a lot of people seem to think they are. I think if you go off Goji-Center's formula and just lower the creatures down to realism like they do in their videos, but for whatever reason still give the Jurassic dinosaurs their amp with the unrealistic feats they have in the films, and then obviously not giving that to the hybrids, it's a pretty obvious answer on who would win there, because one has an amp, the other one doesn't. And if you're going basically nerfing the Jurassic animals down to realism like they do in their videos and keeping theirs on the same level they have in their videos, obviously fictional animals designed to be entertaining aren't going to be as well made as something that people have a lot of knowledge on actual, well-made animals shaped by evolution, made to be actually effective in real life, they're not going to be the same. A creature made for entertainment is obviously going to have design flaws, whereas a creature made by people that have a pretty decent knowledge on stuff like paleontology and biology and stuff like that, they're going to make an actually at least somewhat effective killing machine for a real life setting. So I think the answer is also sort of obvious there. So in conclusion, it depends on how you look at it, is my opinion on this. But more times than not, I do think Goji-Center's hybrids actually beat the originals, which might seem like a weird take from a power scaler, but I mean, I said it. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and don't be arguing about this in the comments for 30 hours like they all did with the Sue vs. Rexy video I did. Please.